Once again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the United States Army Honor Center and Fort Knox. The host for today's ceremony is Major General Larry R. Jordan, Commanding General, United States Army Honor Center and Fort Knox, Kentucky. Also participating in today's ceremony are Lieutenant Colonel Retired Philip W. Latimer and Lieutenant Colonel Retired Charles A. Gates, representatives of the 761st Tank Battalion Association, and Chaplain Theodore Boback, Jr., Office of the Staff Chaplain. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the entrance of the official party and remain standing for the rendering of honors, the playing of the national anthem, and the invocation given by the chaplain.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we gather together this afternoon in respect for the memory of the members of the 761st Tank Battalion through the dedication of the monument. We are grateful for their dedicated service to our country and their many and varied contributions. We remember their dedication, commitment, and loyalty. We remember those who serve with pride, with dignity, with grief, with hurt and pain, in faith, hope, and love. We stand before you in remembrance of those who have made the ultimate giving of their lives so that we might have freedom, justice, and liberty. May we never forget of their sacrifice, of their courage, and of their tenacity. May they be your eternal kingdom. We pray that you grant your blessings upon this occasion, especially pray for the continued choicest blessings for the members and families of the 761st Tank Battalion. We are mindful of man's inhumanity of each other. Enable each of us to overcome discrimination and prejudice, following always your commandments, that we might have love one for another, helping each other, and working with each other. For you are holy, and to you do we ascribe glory forever. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Mr. Zachary Fisher, good afternoon. My wife Elizabeth and I are pleased to take part in this ceremony today. We wish so much to be with all of you as we celebrate many years of rich history of the 761st. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate your new Commanding General, Major General Larry R. Jordan, on his recent appointment and wish him Godspeed in his leadership of Fort Knox and the community there. also take time to recognize my friend, General Franks, and our men and women who today stand ready around the globe to defend our freedom and keep us from harm's way. As we are fortunate to have provided for the memorial being established today, we are even more honored to have the opportunity to show our appreciation to the men and women in uniform who give so selflessly of themselves, especially in peacetime. The 761st is no exception. They served with distinction and deserve the recognition they receive from us today. As you go forth today, remembering old stories, happy and sad, please do not forget the meaning in today's message. Today we acknowledge the service of our African American men and women who have, over the last 2 centuries, fought hard with steadfast dedication and courage to protect our nation. On November 3rd, at the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum in New York City, we will also honor Alonzo Swan. 48 years after his serving on Intrepid, he will receive the Navy's highest honor, the Navy Cross, for heroism and bravery while fending off an enemy kamikaze, which ended up killing 10 of his shipmates and friends. Severely injured, he rescued men who would have otherwise died in the fire. I am happy to say that stories such as the 761st and Alonzo Swans need to be told and remembered by all. Your presence and support today means a great deal to the 761st, the Home of Armor, and Elizabeth and me. God bless you and our great nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Commanding General, United States Army Armor Center and Fort Knox, Major General Larry R. Jordan.
General Franks, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and especially members of the 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion. It's truly a great honor and privilege to be part of this ceremony and among such a distinguished group of armored soldiers. In contemplating what I would say to such an eminent group, a phrase from the song the Army had written a couple of years ago came to mind. It went this way: when we were needed, we were there. Throughout our nation's history, African Americans have always been there. And throughout our nation's military experience, African Americans have always been there. From Crispus Attucks, a runaway slave and patriot who was one of the first people to die in the American Revolution, to the African American soldiers who were in Somalia for Operation Restore Hope, and all the conflicts in between, they have been there. I'm proud to say that in the dark days of World War II, when America needed you, the 761st Tank Battalion was there, and you did your jobs superbly. Your record serves as a shining example to all young soldiers today, especially African Americans, those soldiers who are following in your footsteps. I'd like to take just a few moments to reflect upon that history that you carved. The 761st Tank Battalion was not committed to combat until 7 November 1944, yet spent 183 days in action. Once attached, you fought under 8 different infantry division flags, and in the 3rd, the 9th, and the 7th Armies. Before going into combat, General George S. Patton Jr. spoke to you in France and gave the following charge. Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my Army. I don't care what color you are, so long as you do your job. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to you. Don't let them down, and don't let me down. Well, from your record, you certainly exceeded Patton's expectations. On the first day of combat, your battalion commander was seriously wounded. But in the tradition of your motto, you came out fighting. You took Say. The 761st, along with the 26th Infantry Division, then took more V. On the battlefield, red was the color of everyone's blood, regardless of their skin. You were part of Patton's 3rd Army's famous 90-degree turn to the Battle of the Bulge. Just prior to the Ardennes offensive, the 761st was attached to the 87th Infantry Division. You crossed into Germany 2 days before the German offensive. Still attached, the 761st began fighting in the Bastogne sector on December 31st of 1944. Perhaps one of your greatest accomplishments was achieved as part of the Task Force Rhine when you blasted a path through the Siegfried Line and penetrated over 14 kilometers into enemy territory, allowing the 14th Armored Division to pass unopposed. Therefore, it's extremely appropriate that your battalion marker is sited next to the 14th Armored Divisions. So in this memorial park, just as on the battlefield, you are astride that and alongside that great unit. The Black Panther on your crest was symbolic of how you functioned as a unit in combat. Silently, swiftly, you were attacked without warning from an unexpected location and carried on to decisive victory. Seldom has a unit seen so much action in so short a time. The example you set is the one followed by today's soldiers, whether it's in the Persian Gulf, in Somalia, or other locations. The thing that makes your superb war record even more extraordinary is that you achieved this in the face of racial discrimination and prejudice. You were embroiled in a battle on 2 fronts. At home, battling against racism that was then prevalent throughout the country, and abroad, battling the enemy. Despite these barriers, you were there. You were there abroad fighting as Americans. You were there fighting to prove to those naysayers at home that African American tankers, with the proper leadership and training and equipment, could achieve. And boy, did you achieve. I would be remiss if I didn't mention your fellow comrades who gave their lives during the war. They gave their lives for the victory of a nation. That victory for us meant victory for freedom. That victory meant victory for the institution of democracy, the ideal of family, and the simple principles of common decency and humanity. The contributions of the 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion to the Army, to the military, and to the nation will live on not only in history books, but also in the memories of armored soldiers and in the minds of Americans. Remember, Fort Knox, this is your home, the home of mounted warfare, the home of armor and cavalry, the birthplace and the home of the 761st Tank Battalion. Again, I'd like to say welcome, and I hope your visit with us today is enjoyable and fulfilling, full not only of memories, but also of renewing old acquaintances and friendships. I salute you, and as you say, come out fighting.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant Colonel Retired Philip W. Latimer.
Thank you, General Jordan, for all of the kind words that you had to say about our unit. I am most proud and pleased as President of the 761st Tank Battalion and Allied Veterans Association to speak for our membership at this time. First of all, I'd like to give our thanks to Mr. and Ms. Zachary Fisher for donating the money to build the monument to the 761st Tank Battalion. For that, we're truly grateful. I'd also like to say that we appreciate Captain Thomas O'Sullivan and his work to start looking for someone who would see that the 761st had a monument here at the Patton Museum. I should warn you that when I start talking about the 761st, sometimes I'm a little hard to stop. But today I'm going to try to keep my remarks fairly short in order not to bore anyone with what I have to say. I'm a native Texan, and as such I grew up in segregated communities. I went to segregated schools, but I was most fortunate in one respect. I had parents who did not teach me to be prejudiced. I played with black children. I enjoyed engaging in sports with them, and I grew up without the prejudice that so many people had. So after I'd gone to OCS and had been sent to the 12th Armored Division at Camp Campbell, Kentucky, I was asked by a major from the Armored School if I would be willing to serve with Black Panthers. I'd had time to think this over carefully, and I thought that perhaps I was particularly well qualified to do that. And so I said yes. And I thank God that I wound up with the 761st, because I am proud to have been a member. You know, there are a lot of things that I'd like to talk about. Before I start that, I want to introduce a couple of people here who are former battalion commanders of the 761st. First of all, the man who trained us and who led us into that first day of combat, Colonel Paul Bates. Secondly, the only black officer to ever command the 761st Tank Battalion, Colonel Ivan Harrison. We appreciate these two more than you can ever know. I'd like to tell you an interesting event that happened to me concerning Ivan Harrison. I was assigned to the 5th Tank Group, and I reported in, and they said, you're going to go to the 761st Tank Battalion. You will report in to Major Bates. So I reported in to Major Bates, and we talked a while about my experiences, and he said, I'm going to give you the 81 millimeter mortar platoon. I was a first lieutenant at that time, and it's in headquarters company. So I want you to go down there and report in. Captain Geist is gone on vacation, but Lieutenant Harrison is in command. So I went in, I reported to Lieutenant Harrison, and the first thing he said to me, Lieutenant Latimer, what's your date of rank as first lieutenant? So I told him. He said, you outranked me by several days. You can take over the company right now. I think about that and I laugh, but I didn't take over the company. I said, I believe you know a little more about the company than I do. But going on to our experiences in World War II, it was quite an experience to have been with so many different divisions, and we have different memories about different units, some good, some bad, but all in all, it was an experience to be in Patton's Third Army. I noticed that General Jordan read a very edited version of the remarks. If you know anything about General Patton, you know that a lot of profanity was always mixed in with what he had to say. And so I'll just say that even the movie Patton didn't have as much profanity as there was in that opening speech. So I'll let you think about what some of that might have been. Without going into all the details, because I'm going to ask Colonel Gates to talk about the history of the 761st, I'd like to give you an example of some of the things we ran into and how foolish I was. After I joined the 761st, I had an idea, well, now these men are in the uniform of their country, so when they go into town, they're going to be accepted because they're in there willing to fight and die for their country. But after I'd been at Camp Claiborne for a few days, I found out that wasn't the case at all. And there really wasn't much difference when we got to Camp Hood in Texas. So I can't say much for my native state in that respect. But I was in Fort Hood in September, and things have certainly changed a lot from what they were back in 1943 when we went there. But I'll tell you, as far as our men was concerned, it was a rough time in training that had nothing to do with the training, but simply the prejudice that was found in the two states in which we trained. And it makes me somewhat ashamed because I am a native Texan, but I'm proud now that that situation has changed. Now, I'm not saying there's not any prejudice in the state anymore, but I am saying that our men could now go anywhere they wanted to go, and they certainly couldn't do that during World War II. Another thing that happened was that in 1945, we were recommended for presidential unit citation. And one of the items on which this was based was the Task Force Rhine, which the general spoke about a minute ago. And I might mention that Colonel Bates was the commanding officer of Task Force Rhine. There were some infantry attached, but our battalion and the entire force was commanded by Colonel Bates. And this had a lot to do with our recommendation for that award. Well, that was 1945. When do you think we got it? 1978. It just took 33 years for some president to decide that maybe he ought to look into the records and see what the 761st did. And he appointed two officers, one white and one black, and when they got through checking the records, they gave a report, and there was no question the 761st was awarded that presidential unit citation. Now, I'm going to let the rest of the history be announced by Colonel Gates, but I just want to quote a couple of references from some books that I think would be interesting to you. The first is from the Patton Papers. I know some of you at least are familiar with the fact that the Patton family gave the Third Army historian, Martin Bloomington, the authority to edit the papers of General Patton, and that was written in a 2-volume work. The second volume had to do with the years 1940 to 1945. On page 569 of that second volume, I found this quotation. He inspected a colored tank battalion. No reference to who it was, but since we were the only colored tank battalion in combat at that time, and the only one in the Third Army, there was no question about who he was talking about. And then he quoted this sentence from General Patton. They looked impressive, but I have no confidence in the fighting ability of that race. End of quote. I hope before the war was over that was changed. But the most important thing in that quotation is the sentence by Bloomington that follows. He said, in spite of Patton's expectations, this unit performed exceptionally well in combat. The other quotation I want to give you is from a book by Clay Blair. It is entitled The Forgotten War, the United States in Korea. Now you might wonder what that has to do with the 761st, but in there he had a chapter about the performance of black soldiers in the Korean War, and he referred back to a few things about World War II. He said in general, in the ETO, the small black units performed the best of all. Prominent among these were the 761st Tank Battalion, the 939th Field Artillery Battalion, and the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. So these are just two of the sources of giving some idea of what the 761st did in World War II. Of course, we have many letters from commanding generals of various units which had some nice things to say, but I won't bore you with any more quotation. Now, at this time, I want to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Gates, who commanded Charlie Company during most of the time that we were in combat. Now, Colonel Gates likes to talk about the 761st, but he never says anything about himself. So I want to say a few words about him before I let him get up here. Colonel Gates was one of the most decorated officers in the 761st Tank Battalion. He holds the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. He had 3 tanks shot out from under him. And yet he was always in front leading his tankers on. He was an aggressive fighter, and Charlie Company certainly showed that by the way they performed. And I'm quite proud to call him my friend, because I think very highly of it. He also is a Buffalo Soldier, because he was a member of the 10th Cavalry before he came to the 761st. And recently he was inducted into the Order of St. George in his capacity as a Buffalo Soldier. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Charles A. Gates.
I'll say this, it's a pleasure to stand here before such a crowd. However, you've heard the general speak, you've heard Latimer speak. What in the world am I supposed to say? Really, the 761st is a unit of which I was very, very proud to have been a member. And I always considered myself just a member who was very much interested in the personnel under my particular command and in the unit, because I worked with practically every man in the unit in one phase or another as far as training was concerned. Before I start, though, it's amazing that we are here today. And I would like to know if Captain O'Sullivan is in the audience today. I see he has stood. Stand again, please. I want you to notice that man, because I unconsciously was sitting up telling a lie at a table, which impressed him. And as a result of my tales, we are here today. Thank you, sir. The 761st was one of many Negro units in World War II. For some reason, the U.S. Army setup decided that they would put Negroes in every type of unit which existed. They wanted to prove that the Negro was incapable to command, incapable for combat duty, and so forth. Unfortunately, the worm squirmed, because Negro units really did perform very, very successfully, including those in the Air Corps. And I might say the activities of the men and the officers of World War II made a big influence on things after integration of units. In World War II, we had 2 Negro generals. Since integration, and since 1952, we have had over 40 Negroes to become generals, 5 of whom were 4-star generals, and 1 a woman. So something must have happened by the activities of men in World War II, which changed things considerably. And when integration took place, the Negro officer and enlisted personnel had an opportunity to succeed. May it continue in that particular phase of development. And it is a surprise, as you see here today, that you have a Negro general at Fort Knox. That's fantastic in my book. Fantastic. The history has been fairly well told as far as activities of 761st in World War II. But there are some little things which influenced our particular successes. When you hear of a headquarters company, the first thing you think about are the people who are on the staff. However, there were other things in headquarters company which were of interest. We had an assault gun platoon. We had a mortar platoon. We had a tank section. All 3 of those particular elements were used in various capacities. In fact, poor headquarters company lost their particular activities because they were used so highly and so much in higher command and with the line companies. Another thing that we failed to take into consideration was the work of our service company. We did not want for food. We did not want for gasoline. We did not want for ammunition, because we had a service company who saw to it we had more than was needed. In fact, I think that